Real life does not model after universities. While higher education attempts to bring structure and order into formal education, real life spans across disciplines. For the training of psychotherapists, it is not just helping trainees become scientist practitioners, as we would often say. In this video, I make the case that we need to sweep the clock of learning across disciplines, or CLAD, starting from art, science, design, and philosophy. The input of one domain becomes the output for the other. Arts. We start at midnight by first entering the conversational nature of therapy as an art form. Conversation is fundamental to the social realm of therapy, but it serves a specific intention of healing for the client or patient. Within this ritual, two parties or more enter into this predefined space that is sanctioned by the healer and professional governing bodies that say, this is a safe and confidential space for a person to work through their challenges. I consider therapy as a conversational performance because, unlike normal chit-chat, this is a specific aim and directionality of promoting healing for this particular person, coupled with both parties dancing back and forth with a disposition of openness to emergent possibilities. The conversational nature of reality formation in therapy involves the improvisational performance, the not yet seen ahead of time between two people or more. As such, the improvisational nature of therapy requires a mindset of three things: appreciation, responsiveness, and surrender. One has to be appreciative of the limits and resources that he or she brings into the conversation, responsive to the ebb and flow, each left and right turn, or even U-turns, and still be able to focus on the general direction and balance all of that without imposing a rigid reality. Finally, we need a quality of surrender towards the uncertainty, much like driving in a pitch-dark road with only your headlights on. The only way to see further is to proceed further with prudence. I consider the emotionally charged endeavor of therapy as art because it requires a tendency towards being open to experience and with an active engagement of bringing your gifts to bear. Said in another way, art is a process of bringing various elements together and ultimately growing it into a gift with the potential to transform someone. In art, we engage in a performing role. Number 2, science. Science learns from the performance of art by forensically codifying the social and experiential activity of therapy and translating that into data. That data is then churned into information, and in turn, that information is analyzed into knowledge. Data, information, knowledge. In the realm of science, hypothetical thinking, or developing smart hunches, is highly encouraged so as to test out ideas, consider existing evidence in light of the new knowledge, and form new questions to pursue. While the domain of art is less organized, messy in fact, science moves in an organized and systematic process with the aim of developing tentative ideas about reality and test them further. The realm of science need not be seen as a disparate process of therapy, and neither is it enough to be what we earlier said about becoming a scientist practitioner, as we shall see in the next two domains. In science, we take on an analyzing role. Third, design. Design is not just about beautification or prettification. Design is a way of intersecting form and function. One of the pioneers in decision science, Herbert Simon, says, "The proper study of mankind is the science of design." Design takes the fermenting knowledge gleaned from the performative role of art and the analytical knowledge gained in science and shapes a conducive environment for deep learning to not only take place, but to architect a sustainable system that promotes adaptable learning. As a therapist, you want to think about designing deep learning environments that is personalized towards your growth edge. Playfulness is encouraged. Our world can be organized into either by default or by design. If left to by default, real learning that translates into better outcomes rarely happens. In fact, evidence shows that even though we feel like we are getting better with experience, on average, our effectiveness gets worse over time. When we make a choice that is by design, we actively begin to shape our internal landscape and external environment that facilitates ongoing development. Perhaps a useful way to see the role of design is to think of yourself as a gardener. You are creating a nurturing environment that promotes growth. In design, we mother nature. We think in terms of nurturing. Number 4, philosophy. We have reached the final discipline in the clock of learning. The domain of philosophy is to take the inputs from arts, science, and design and convert the knowledge into wisdom. Data, information, knowledge, wisdom. The activity of theorizing requires the ability to not just think in analogies, but also to be able to extract first principles from the inputs of 3 previous domains. Philosophy must not only include what is learned from art and science regarding what we have learned, but also from design regarding how we learn. In the clock of learning across disciplines, what we develop in philosophy, the ideas, concepts, heuristics, principles, feeds back into the performative role of art, going through the circle again. In philosophy, we engage in theorizing. Divergence to convergence. In the right half of CLAD, as you proceed further to 3 o'clock, there is a quality of divergence or widening of your lenses, experimenting and testing out the variation of ideas at play. In the left half, as you approach 9 o'clock, you start to pull what you have learned. This process of convergence or narrowing of your focus helps you hone in and select key ideas that can guide your work and at the same time promotes ongoing development. Ideographic and nomothetic. Next, if you dissect the CLAD horizontally, the top half is generally more ideographic. The ideographic approach focuses on the individual, studying in detail not only the idiosyncratic way of how you work in therapy, i.e. art, but also what we can understand from your unique data, i.e. science. On the bottom half of CLAD, the nomothetic approach attempts to generalize the knowledge and see how it fits with a larger pattern of outcomes and process research that we know in psychotherapy research literature. The virtuous circle. It is critical to understand that the clock of learning across disciplines emphasizes the need to move in a virtuous circle. Each domain and its constituent chain of events and activities informs the next, reinforcing themselves through a feedback loop. Now, why do we start with the domain of art? One curious observation you might make is, why do we start with art? In the traditional banking model of education, by and large, we adopt a deductive approach. That is, we start with the theory, go to the research, then move into practice. I argue that even though, to some degree, we need a handful of fundamental ideas in our bag before we begin, we need to consider the implications of taking an inductive approach instead. For instance, by imposing other master therapists' theories beforehand into the learner's mind, we fail to recognize that even though these theories are useful, they are often developed after the fact. When we start with theories and overemphasize on them, we inadvertently lure trainees into a formulaic view of therapy. Instead, we must take heed of what Milton Erickson said in 1983. Develop your own technique. Don't try to use somebody else's technique. Don't try to imitate my voice or my cadence. Just discover your own. Be your own natural self. It's the individual responding to the individual. I've experimented with trying to do something the way somebody else would do it. It's a mess. In the second and final part of CLAD, I will provide specific examples of how this might look like, especially when we are trying to reimagine education in psychotherapy. I will also discuss how deliberate practice is baked into this process. So stay tuned.